The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk, the Bronx's flagship television talk show. We've got a special 1-hour forum tonight, and our phones are open, so please join this important dialogue by calling 718-960-7241. You can also begin calling at any time, but if you do get a busy signal, please call back. We'll begin taking those calls a little later in the program. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Well, during the first week of October, 2 gay teenagers and a gay man were beaten and tortured in an abandoned house on Osborne Place in Morris Heights. 11 men were arrested for the attack. Of those, 4 have had the charges dropped and 4 have been indicted. There was also talk of plea bargains being offered. This case has tentacles that reach into many aspects of Bronx life: being gay in the Bronx, gangs, our criminal justice system, housing, legislation, and much more. As a result, we thought it important to bring together a community for this special 1-hour forum. Many issues, some excellent guests, and your phone calls too. I hope you'll stay with us for the full hour. So let's introduce all of the guests. We'll start off with Mr. Ed Garcia-Conde, who's from Welcome to Melrose. He pinch hit at the last minute, so we thank Ed for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Also, Councilmember Annabelle Palmer, who's the head of the Bronx Council delegation. Thank you for joining us. Also, a criminal justice professor and at Monroe College and former NYPD Lieutenant Diane Ort. Thank you, Professor Ort, for joining us. The Director of Program Marketing for Council for Unity, a group that deals with gangs. Good evening to Sean Gino Johnson. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And the Deputy Director of University Neighborhood Housing Program, Greg Lobo-Jost. Greg, thank you for coming back on the program.
Definitely.
Let's start with you, Ed, because really, in essence, what this all boils down to is being gay in the Bronx. Give us a perspective on what it's like to be gay in the Bronx. Is this a comfortable place to be gay, or not a comfortable place to be gay in the Bronx?
I think it's a fine line. It depends which neighborhood you're in the Bronx. I think the Bronx is very much a mirror and a reflection of the rest of New York City, where you have pockets of neighborhoods where you can feel safe and other pockets where you might not feel so safe. Personally, where I grew up and where I live now, I never had any problems. I never felt out of place or anything. People pretty much minded their own business and never bothered me. But I do have friends in other parts of the Bronx, like Hunts Point, where they don't feel comfortable. They feel that they have to hide who they are and they have to be careful because of the lifestyle that they lead.
And what happens? Walking down the street, somebody says something?
Usually you can get, you'll hear like a snicker or a comment or, like just a lot of derogatory terms, especially if they see 2 guys walking together, if they're not, wearing typical hood gear or anything like that. And, if you see them out of place, then right away, the first thing they think is that you're gay or something. And that's not, it's not open season.
Was this incident, when you heard about it, of course, we were all horrified, there's no question about that. Did it come as a surprise, or did you say to yourself, the climate is such that this sort of thing, unfortunately, was bound to happen? Or was it like, oh my goodness, this came out of nowhere?
I kind of actually felt it came a little bit out of nowhere. I mean, even though it was a little hostile out there, I just didn't think it was going to happen so close to home. You hear about all these horrific things happening elsewhere out in the rest of the country. You hear about it happening in Chelsea. I never thought that it would actually be so close to home, and I was actually horrified when it happened. But at the same time, I'm not so shocked because so much of our leadership out there is spewing such hatred that it's almost as if they're almost inciting this kind of behavior in our residents.
Council member, what do you hear from constituents, from gay constituents or straight constituents about acceptance of lifestyles?
You know, from the gay community, I've partnered up with them since I've been elected, and we've been able to do great work through the organizations that do the kind of work in the communities, bringing out the message, a message of unity, basically, one, to let the community know that we're all human beings, we're all individuals, and no one should be picking on anyone else because of a lifestyle or a sexual orientation. We've been able, with the leadership of Speaker Quinn, go into schools in March, and the leadership of Chancellor Joe Klein, and talk about bullying, and basically just adopted a week where schools and principals have been asked to participate in the bullying message and the effects that it has on one another. In terms of the straight community, I haven't heard in my office particular any major concerns of straight versus gays. I believe the community we're trying to live cohesively and be respectful to one another.
Of each other. Let's talk with you, Mr. Johnson, about Council for Unity and what you do. Part of this, as I outlined at the top of the show, there are many different aspects of it, and part of it is the notion of gangs. Did this incident surprise you as far as the direction of it? We know that there are many terrible things that gangs have done, but the direction this was aimed toward 3 gay men in the Bronx.
I really wasn't surprised, because that's one of the problems gangs have, is being tolerant of others that are different, being tolerant of other cultures, being tolerant of other lifestyles, and that's one of the main issues that gangs have, dealing with other diversity.
So then you heard about it and you were like, unfortunately, it's somewhat predictable.
It's a tragic thing, but yes, it was.
As we go along this evening, we'll get back to you about the kinds of things that happen in gangs, and of course with everybody who's on the panel here, about how do we prevent these things in the future. Professor Ort, let's talk about NYPD and NYPD training. Is there sufficient sensitivity training so that people who are becoming police officers understand these issues and understand what might be going on between people, or is it an area that maybe the NYPD is lacking?
I believe that there is sufficient training as we move from a culture and get exposed to sensitivities like hate crimes, whether it be racial or bias-oriented. The police department has addressed the frequency of it through training, and I believe that the police officers now are better trained to deal with different circumstances and sensitivities that have come along with that, being that the frequency has increased. Because as you know, it's underreported because individuals don't want to report these types of crimes.
Do you think that is your sense now that people feel more comfortable, that the NYPD is more sensitive, and they have, and we're going to go to Mr. Garcia and ask him that direct question. Is your sense that the NYPD is open enough and people feel better about coming forward?
I think year after year they're becoming more open to it.
Okay. Ed, your thoughts? If you're a victim of a crime, do you or others feel comfortable about going to the NYPD, or is you getting into a situation that may not even be better than the one you were just in?
I feel that is, as long as you're in Manhattan, and you're in Chelsea, in the Village, anywhere in Manhattan, you're fine. But there is a definite feeling of less sensitivity in the outer boroughs, especially in the Bronx from...
Even from the NYPD?
Correct.
Let's bring Greg Lobo-Jost. Another very, I thought, troubling aspect of this was the idea that apparently the people in the neighborhood, everybody seemed to know there was an abandoned house that was used for parties, and they were like, oh, well, they always use that place for parties. Do we have a lot of those kinds of properties in the Bronx that are abandoned and may be used by squatters not only for living but also for parties or whatever else they might be doing?
Yeah, there's not a 100% count of all of the houses, but a house could be vacant for a number of reasons. A lot of them, probably the most common is if the house is in foreclosure, it's gone through foreclosure, and the owner's been evicted, and the bank takes control of the property. And there's a couple hundred of properties like that throughout the Bronx.
100?
Yes.
That's a significant. I mean, It sounds like, well, there's a couple of hundred, but that sounds like a significant number.
It's significant, and it's obviously that's a more recent trend. I mean, there's been foreclosure over the years, but this is a growing crisis that's spreading into pretty much every neighborhood in the Bronx, and so we've got a lot of those properties.
We certainly have to ask the council member about that. So what are your thoughts about what you hear when there are so many properties? And look, it's not only that there are abandoned properties or empty places, but it has the potential for a real problem, as there was in this case.
I think you're absolutely right in bringing up the surge we've seen in closed properties, on habitable properties due to foreclosures. I know I've seen them in my district. It has grown, and to even get the bank on the phone to try to figure out how do we clean up the graffiti from these properties, or the front of the property, to maintain the neighborhood looking intact, it becomes difficult. So for someone who is looking for a place to hang out, looking for a place, to do wrong, it becomes easy access for these properties. In terms of, there's other kinds of properties that we have where the land, they're habitable by people, but the landlord is not really paying attention to what's going on in these buildings.
What's the answer, really? How do we get to a point where, everybody's involved in dealing with eliminating this problem? My start is I always like to go to the community board, to the precinct council. I know that's where I invite most of the community to go and bring these issues to try then to figure out collectively how do we start sort of taking back these properties from the hands of the wrong people. Which brings up another point which has a number of different angles on this particular incident, Professor Ort, this idea of the community being its own eyes and ears. And one would wonder if people did what the council member just suggested months ago and said, we've got this building at Osborne Place that is unoccupied, and they brought it to police or other people's attention, if it could have been solved. So my question is there still this idea, we don't snitch, we don't tell, don't bother me, I don't want to get involved?
I think that does still exist, especially when there are neighborhoods that have gang members involved, that individuals do not want to speak about things like that because of fear of retribution.
So in other words, if people were using this for their leisure or whatever they were using it for, they would not do it because of the gangs who were involved.
That's one of the possibilities of why they wouldn't do it. I would hope that individuals would call the police. This way they could stop such activity if illegal activity is occurring.
Which brings up another aspect which actually was a good thing. Apparently one of the reasons that the NYPD was able to break the case relatively quickly was because a member of the community, at least according to reports, slipped a police officer a note or a phone number or whatever it was. So I'll give you the floor. Tell us why it's important that people in the community deal with those kinds of things, and of course along with it, can people be protected so if they do quote unquote snitch, then they won't be the victim of a crime but actually help to solve a crime?
Well, the police rely on the community to be the eyes and ears, as you mentioned. Without the community speaking to the police and letting the police know where the problems lie, whether it's a quality of life crime, if it's people hanging out on the corner, drinking, talking, or using an abandoned house for illegal activities, the police department can't be everywhere all the time. And I'm not making that as a justification, but we have to rely on each other, and the police have to work in partnership with the community to be able to solve these crimes and assist the conditions in the community.
It really helps. I mean, this is not just us talking on a TV show. This really helps.
Absolutely.
And certainly in this case, we can point to a direct correlation.
Absolutely. And, that's why the premise of community policing worked so well when it first was introduced to New York City. Police officers getting out of the radio patrol cars and speaking to the community, because that's where they're going to get their information from. And they form a relationship, and then they're able to say, oh, yeah, I know Diane. Let me talk to her about this issue I'm having. And, the broken windows theory, you want to start small. An abandoned building might be an eyesore, but then it could then end up into something this tragic.
And it works. And they're to all the other issues that we hear, and we've dealt with them on the show, whether it be stop and frisk and all the other problems, there are solutions and there are good pockets of these relationships that work.
Absolutely.
It's time to talk to our gang friend here. He's not a friend of gangs in that way, that's for sure. This whole idea that there would be revenge, talk to me about it, and talk to our viewers, of course, about it, as far as how realistic, how afraid should community members be, and is there a way of dealing with these things, of telling the truth, of representing your neighborhood, and not put yourself in danger?
Well, we have to be honest. Many of our community members had bad experience with the police. Whether they're a family member growing up, and these things are passed down through the community. And sometimes it's kind of hard to get past that bad experience. I think one of the things that need to be done is the perception needs to change of law enforcement as far as how they're willing to deal with the community, because community members, they hear change, they're looking for change, but they still turn on the TV and they hear about these little incidents that's happening, and it's a fear. It's a fear, and it's the same thing that drives the gangs.
We're going to take a short break. Before we do, I want to mention two things. One is to our viewers, the phones are open if you'd like to join in the conversation and have your say about experiences maybe that you have, your thoughts on this terrible incident that happened, or just about anything going on, then don't hesitate to call in at 718-960-7241. But before we take the break, I want you to articulate for us, which is, I think, a wonderful concept. What is Council for Unity, and how do you combat the notion of gangs so we don't get to the horrible situation that we had in the Bronx? And I can see by your smile you're glad I asked that question.
Council for Unity's methodology is, if you bring everybody together, there's no one left to fight. Council believes that if we can open dialogue, communicate effectively, and teach those members, that gang members that don't know how to communicate with mainstream society, and once that dialogue is open, there's more understanding, because pretty much everybody wants the same thing.
And you're in schools and you work with...
We're in schools, we're in communities, we have adult and parent partnership, we also have a law enforcement model, we're also in institutions as well.
And you work with all these different groups, and you can show that it's effective?
Absolutely.
You can see the numbers have changed. So there is an answer, especially for parents who might be watching this saying, you know what, I have a son or daughter who's involved, I don't know how to get him out. Council for Unity might be one way out.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's take a break, okay? We're going to take a break, and then we'll be back. More Bronx Talk coming up. Your phone calls, as well as all these fine guests. We're also going to have the executive director of the Bronx Community Pride Center join us in just a moment. Ed, thanks for pinch hitting for the beginning of the show, and we'll be right back. More Bronx Talk right after this.
Nicole, good luck on the play tonight. You're welcome. What's up, guys? Now you're gonna make sure that you return those on Monday, right? Thank you. Oh, nice. We'll talk to you for a second. Go ahead, get your wallet. Come on, let me get your wallet. Get out the way.
911. What is your emergency?
Please, send help.
Tell me what happened.
I think he's dead. Please, he was shot.
Okay, what's going on right now?
I think he needs help. Send help.
Okay, back with you on BronxTalk. We have a special forum, and we're talking about this terrible anti-gay torture incident that happened, and I hate using the word incident, although I've used it a couple of times, that happened in the Bronx at the beginning of October. We're joined now by Dirk McCall from the Bronx Community Pride Center. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell me a little bit about the organization of gay, lesbian, and transgender people in the Bronx. Is there a strong organization? Could it be better, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes. Bronx Community Pride Center is the LGBT social service agency in the Bronx. Just recently, we've been working with a number of other up-and-coming organizations trying to organize the community. We're working with a group called Boogie Down Pride, which is coming back. They used to organize the Bronx Pride festivities during June, during Gay Pride Month. We work with a group called Brain Power, which works with LGBT youth in the schools. We provide direct social services. We are the organizing tool for the community. We provide the forum. We have 3 floors in Mott Haven. We operate a youth drop-in center with job training programs, self-esteem programs, HIV prevention programs, transgender support programs, and we go out into the communities to organize to make sure that people have a voice, people have a place to go to have safe space.
You know, it sounds wonderful, and the work you're doing is without a doubt needed and wonderful. So here's the question, the very difficult question. If we have these services, why do we have these a terrible incident like the one?
Because we need more services. We also go out into the schools. We don't just provide the safe space. We go into the schools. We go into the communities. We work with the elected officials. We work with the community boards. We actually run a program called Sexuality Matters that goes into the high schools, talks to students about LGBTQ issues, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning issues. We provide trainings to different organizations on how to work with LGBT consumers. We also make sure to let people know that we're there so that they have a place to go. If we don't go in and talk about these issues in the school, people don't know about it. They don't know there's a safe space to go. The Bronx is a fairly conservative borough in terms of social issues. Not every community is as accepting. So a lot of people in the Bronx aren't comfortable being out in the Bronx. They don't want to be out in their own neighborhood.
You know, I want to get into that a little bit, and then we're going to bring the council member in to talk about the whole notion of social support systems in general. Frankly, the loudest voice against gay marriage is a Bronx state senator. I've had a number of different dialogues with people about this. Do you think that comes into play? Certainly, Senator Diaz would not support anything remotely related to an incident like this, but the notion that we have not endorsed politically equality, do you think it comes into play in people's minds? Most
of the Bronx elected officials are actually very strong allies of the LGBT community. We still have much to do, but I think the senator, the Reverend Ruben Diaz, is actually emblematic of a certain element within the community, a certain more conservative Pentecostalist element that homosexuality is rejected on biblical grounds. And it's a matter of us going, talking, introducing ourselves. Once you know an actual gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender person, we're no longer the other. We're somebody who's part of your family. And we're still working on the Reverend. We don't give up hope on anybody. But his son is a supporter on the community on many issues. We have council members like Annabelle Palma who are true champions of the community. Senator Serrano, Congressmember Serrano, Assemblymember and City Council Member Carmen Arroyo. We have pockets of support throughout the borough. People who go out there and they talk to their constituents and say, it's okay to be gay. It's okay to come out. We want to provide the safe space in the schools, but we have to go into the churches. If we're not going into the churches and into the senior centers where there are more conservative pockets, we're not being as visible.
So you need to do more of it, is what you're saying.
Much more.
Council member, back to the question on social services and the wonderful things that you do at the Pride Center is one thing. Do we have enough? And if not, how do we get more, the notion of more social services when, frankly, all we hear about is cut back, cut back, cut
Gary,
back?
I don't, you will never hear me say that we get enough of, dollars to address the issue of social services. We've come a long way. We've done a lot. We did exceptional during this tough budget year that we were faced with. It was the first time I honestly thought, we were going to lose a lot more services under the social service aspect of the budget, and we were able to save lots of dollars that the administration wanted to cut back, especially around preventive services. And so when we're talking about, expanding the programs that already exist, like the ones that Dirk McCall runs, the
Or
Bronx
Council for Unity, for example.
right. These are the programs that are in the ground, in the community, reaching our constituency, and that's how we best, are able to partner up and make sure that, the community is getting the message and that we're working towards a better community.
Professor Ort, this notion, and this has been debated throughout the city, certainly over the last 15 or 20 years, certainly during the life of this television program, that of the relationship between social programs and crime levels. If we have more programs like the one that Mr. McCall is involved with, the one that Mr. Johnson is involved in, does that affect crime? Or is it really people are saying, and this has been out there, you keep putting money into these programs, but we really need more cops on the street?
Well, I think there has to be a fine balance between both of them. Without those programs, the crime rate and tolerance would just go through the roof. We have to start somewhere. We have to work in partnership with each other. That's the only way it works. Social programs are very important. Just like when Mayor Giuliani brought into the quality of life crimes. Let's worry about the quality of life crimes because those foster bigger crimes. This is a kind of the similar to that. You start with someone, a troubled youth, or maybe who has questions, and you take them and give them guidance, then they're not going to end up committing crimes later on. So there has to be a fine balance. You have to have the police officers on the street. You have to have, like I said before, the community interaction because the police department was a reactionary police department. Then community policing came in where it was more proactive. Let's reach out to the community, see what's going on, see where the problems lie, and let's address them no matter how small so they won't get bigger.
I'm going to do something really unfair. I'm going to have you and I play council member here, and we'll see how the council... I got $3 million of funding. I got $3 million. You can give it to one place. Put it in one place. Would you rather put it to a community center in the Bronx or community programs, or would you rather give the $3 million to increase the number of cops on the street?
That's an unfair question.
It is.
That's a bad question. I deal with that every day. I know that.
Yes.
All right. That's an unfair question.
That's an unfair question.
Right.
I'll answer it. Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, it would be an easy answer. You'd want to give at least an appropriate amount, half to one, half to the other, because without the social services, without the necessary police, how are we going to make this work? How are we going to make this a better place to live?
In a way, though, the question is presented to our viewers so that people in the Bronx can know what Councilmember Palmer does and her colleagues do all the time, because here you've got a limited amount of money. You've got people all around here who each one of them well-deserving. Yes. And how do you split it up to greatest effect in this? What would it take to address this idea of abandoned houses so that we wouldn't have this issue anymore? We can say, you know what, we no longer have pockets where there are the homes that are making the neighborhoods look crummy and also potentially become places for crime. What does it take? The $3 million? You can use that as well?
We had this little thing called the housing bubble, and it blew up, and that's pretty much where we got to the point where we are now. So there's not any one easy answer. The idea that banks need to be responsible in this equation also for properties that they own and that are vacant, that needs to get stepped up a little bit more. I know there was some recent state legislation about that and getting banks to take more responsibility for upkeep of their properties.
So it may not necessarily be a money thing, it's a legislation thing, you feel like? And what would that legislation say?
Well, the legislation that passed was requiring banks to maintain the properties in good condition and also make sure they're secured, which is a big issue, but it's not going to take care of every single property. For instance, this one was not in foreclosure, but was abandoned, vacant home for another reason. And there's other houses that, for instance, were, there's one in my neighborhood that was slated to be demolished because it was going to be built into something else. And that kind of got stalled right in the middle. So the house is boarded up, it's got a fence around it, but for a long time the fence kept getting worse and worse, and people were coming in and out all the time, you could see. And recently they did some big improvements to the fence.
You know, back to an earlier question then, do people in the community, are they saying to you and to others and even to officials, hey, there's a problem here? Or is it really because you know about it, it gets some attention? Or is the community partnering in the issue?
I think it really depends also on the neighborhood, and if you have folks right in that immediate vicinity who are really feeling like they want to take ownership and be participants and call into their elected officials or even to 311 or notify their local precinct about it, then you're going to have that in some cases, but in other ones that's not the case.
Council member, the city council over the last half a dozen years has really made a number of different attempts to lean on the banks and to correct this problem. Again, more needs to be done. What's in the horizon, and what can the council do to help address this issue?
Gary, right now, earlier this year, under the leadership of Speaker Quinn, we created the stress building task force, which I happen to be one of the co-chairs of, and it's actually having this dialogue with the banks, bringing them to the table, identifying how they're besides foreclosures, who they're selling these properties to, and making sure that the people that are buying these properties are responsible, are going to be in the community, and are going to be really taking care of these properties, and not just trying to find a quick way to make a couple of $1 million on the backs of the people that have been in that community and then take off.
And certainly the seriousness of the issue is underscored by this terrible thing that happened just a month ago. I mean, it's not just, well, we kind of want to clean up the neighborhood. We have the potential for people to be badly hurt, and that's what happened.
Definitely, I think this is this incident, this horrific incident that happened earlier in the month. It's what we've been trying to prevent, and it's earlier was said that you want to make sure, are there people in the communities? I know that I get these calls in my office. I know that especially from seniors who live adjacent to these abandoned properties have huge concerns about them. And so when the calls come in, we then call the local priest, and we ask the community to also make a report on 311 so it's well documented, and try to really do outreach to these banks, which is still the most difficult part of the equation. I think talking to the police department and the community has become the easier part of it.
We're going to take a very short break. I want to remind folks that if you'd like to call in, the number is 718-960-7241. We'll take those phone calls right after we take the short break. Our panel tonight is talking about the horrific anti-gay torture incident that happened in the Bronx at the beginning of October. We have a wonderful panel of guests, and we'll be back with your calls right after this.
Please, stand back, sir. We're just dumping a little extra sewage here. I hope those shoes aren't new. Oh, God.
Okay, back with you on Bronx Talk. We're talking about a terrible incident of anti-gay torture that happened in the Bronx just a couple of weeks ago. During the break, Mr. McCall was talking about the idea that it's possible that the people who were victims were not actually gay, but the whole notion was that they were perceived to be gay. Is it? I hadn't heard that, so maybe you can enlighten us.
I haven't heard from any of the victims as to how they identify their sexual orientation. One person has come forward with his face covered with a hoodie and said that he doesn't identify as gay, but the other two people who were attacked haven't come forward to speak to the press and say, I'm gay or I'm not gay. One of them was alleged to be gay and alleged to have a relative who was also gay, but we don't know if he in fact identifies that way, and we shouldn't be putting labels onto them. But these people were attacked because they were perceived to be gay. And so you can be a heterosexual, and if you're not somebody who conforms to gender norms, you could be extremely vulnerable, because they could say they're sending a message by attacking you, and they may be attacking a heterosexual by accident.
Sounds like education is the bottom line here. And
Very
I'm
much.
sure, Mr. Johnson, do you deal with those issues? Do gang members, who you deal with, talk about, hey, I don't like that guy because he's gay, or say something horrific like that?
The culture, the gang culture, is not tolerant of anything other than
themselves,
their culture, in which their lifestyle and their way of living. And sometimes that is one of the hardest things Council for Unity works with the gang members, is to become tolerant with others that are not like them, different sexual genders, also mainstream society. They have trouble. Gang members have trouble getting along with the community.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the telephone. I know some folks have been waiting to get to us. So it is Mark from Pelham Parkway, our buddy Mark. How are you, Mark? What's going on?
Hey, Gary, ladies and gentlemen, council member. I'm going to make a statement, and then I wonder what the group will think about what I'm about to say. I think gays today are at their pinnacle of where their equal rights are just about ready to come fully into play. I think there are women who were domestically abused 40 years ago and wouldn't come out and say anything. There are the African Americans from 60 years ago, 40 years ago. They're like the Jews were, any minority. I think what you have a problem with is any type of zealot that finds a group to pick on can justify what they do. When you had an Orthodox Jew assassinate Yitzhak Rabin, he said it was okay to do it because he was trying to make peace with the Palestinians. When Martin Luther King was killed, they found it justifiable because the African Americans were coming into power and were gaining their full rights. When you have cases of where you have people, including politicians like Palladino, who go, gay is against this and that, it sends certain messages to certain groups that it's okay to pick on them. When you have an assistant attorney general in a state that has waged a one-man war on a guy who's the president of his college. He's not the president of the college, but of the student body in the college. That if you've been following, he's been holding up signs, calling him biased names, calling him fag and power and stuff like that.
So Mark, your point is that this is similar to other civil rights issues. And if I understood what you were saying in the beginning, you feel like we're right on the edge of correcting it or moving the next step. That's what your point is?
Well, I think we will eventually get there, but as long as you have certain people, whoever they use religious beliefs, or they just so stoned in their old ways from the old country that it's not tolerated, you can't have a true equality.
Great.
The problem, and what we've got to look at above that is, you either have equality for all or none is equal.
Thank you, Mark, very much. Mr. McCall, that leads right into you. Your thoughts on what you heard?
I think Mark is correct. I think we are nearing the cusp of equality, and you see these hate crimes take place in series. It's not ever an isolated incident. We've had a number of attacks in Manhattan. We had an attack at the Stonewall Inn where the initial, this phase of organizing in the LGBT community took place. We've had attacks in Chelsea. We've had attacks in Queens. We've had a number of smaller level attacks in the Bronx since this took place. We're aware of at least 3 jumpings. We've been victimized by the rash of suicides. One of our former employees at Bronx Community Pride Center committed suicide last week, jumping from a building. It's appalling. But the community, people like Palladino, I think Mark is right, they feel emboldened when they see the LGBT community and our allies making progress on these social issues, and they come out to try to stand in the way and stop it. It's always when we raise our profile more that the attacks start, and it's a very sad commentary, but I think we have been making progress, slow and steady, and we still have a long way to go.
You and your organization put out a series of responses to the various aspects of the legal process here. You were disappointed when you heard, I assume, that D.A. Johnson was considering plea bargaining with some of the alleged perpetrators.
Well, 4 of the charges weren't brought. They were before the grand jury, but 4 of the people who had been accused initially of these charges aren't actually being charged. And we're meeting with the district attorney. We've coordinated a coalition out of the Bronx Community Pride Center with all the other LGBT leaders in the Bronx and our allies. We call it the Bronx United Against Hate Crimes Coalition. We're organized on Facebook and on Google groups. We've created 3 subcommittees. We're actually coordinating an entire community response, town halls, a rally, outreach to the schools. We've been calling schools all week, offering our help to get GSAs, gay straight alliances, in the high school set up. We also have to provide support for the parents. When the students come out, you have to have somebody to support the family.
And what is the response you're getting?
Extremely favorable.
Extremely favorable.
We are meeting with 4 schools this week. We stand ready to go into other schools. We offer a module called Sexuality Matters, where we go in and train teachers, paraprofessionals, guidance counselors, and speak to the student body.
You know, that's heartening, frankly, and maybe what Mark was suggesting is right, that we're getting there. Seems to me you and Mr. Johnson should go hand in hand into some of these places.
Let's go together.
and because you're really both working on the same thing, ultimately.
Very much.
Which brings us back to our criminal justice professor. The DA, the story came out that they were offering a plea bargain. There are people disappointed that charges were dropped. What are the problems that Robert Johnson and any DA has in prosecuting a case like this?
Well, this case has so many challenges on so many different levels. You not only have individuals who were attacked because they were perceived to be gay or maybe are gay. You have the component where they may not be forthcoming in telling the truth of what happened, i.e. one of the victims went to the hospital after the attack and didn't mention anything regarding that it was an anti-gay assault. He said that he was jumped, I believe. That's the emergency room, the story that they had gotten. You have now alleged gang members involved, where that has a whole nother array of issues, where another reason why victims won't be forthcoming with it. Community members or neighbors, thankfully somebody did write a note and hand it to the police to get some information out there. So you have that challenge with regards to retaliation, perceived retaliation from gang members. And then you have also the issue with regards to the crime scene. It occurred on Sunday. It didn't come till days later when they were able to get to the crime scene. Arrests weren't made till that Thursday. By the time the detectives arrived at the crime scene was smelled of bleach. They put bleach down the drains. They cut out portions of rugs where there might have been DNA evidence. So there are so many facets, and fresh paint was put on in some areas of the apartment.
So, rather remarkable, which of course brings us back to what Mr. Jost was talking about the abandoned properties, that they were so secure in this property that not only did they commit it, then they knew that they had done something wrong and had the time and space to actually go about cleansing a crime scene. It's rather remarkable.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was like a playpen to commit this kind of thing.
It concerns me that they felt that they had that much security and confidence in being able to do something like this and not get caught.
Mm-hmm. Although they have gotten caught. So I guess your bottom line is, at least some, is that you have some sympathy for D.A. Johnson in this, because it's a very difficult case to prosecute, even though we're all horrified. We say whoever did it, of course, needs to go to jail.
I don't know if I have sympathy for him, but it's just a matter of he's facing some challenges with regards to being able to prosecute fully.
Is there a compromise solution at this point to letting 4 of them go or deciding not to? Or do you think, for example, if more evidence, he knows where they are and he can bring them back in? Or just describe what the possibilities are for those who may have been let go.
I would imagine that the district attorney is hoping that new evidence would surface, or individuals party to the crime or eyewitnesses to the crime or have some knowledge of it would come forward so that he can fully prosecute, because I'm sure that is his intent. He's doing the best he can with what he has.
Which brings us to Mr. Johnson and just that whole notion of them being so comfortable in this playhouse that not only could they commit this crime, allegedly, of course, we don't have any convictions yet, but then also have the time and space to cleanse it, which would indicate that they knew they had done wrong. You know, sometimes a criminal mind is like, I don't know, I did wrong, but they were so secure that they had done wrong and they really thought they could simply get away with it. Like a play day.
If in fact that is true, those that are alleged to do it have done it, I don't think they was thinking in that fashion. I think at that moment they felt betrayal.
Betrayal by of?
The fact if in fact they were gay, they might have felt, well, you deceived me. You're not who you said to be. And they were so angry at that. And they reacted. And I think after the fact, they realized it went too far. And right now, there's a strong message going out through the community that certain crimes are not going to be tolerated.
So that...
And I think that put fear in them.
This is a very interesting and sensitive thing. So if I'm understanding what you're saying is that we will tolerate you guys having your gang, having your little fun, and kind of like doing some bad things. But in this case, you went too far, and the reason that they ultimately tried to cleanse it is because it went too far, and even their buddies were like, hey, now you're giving everybody a bad name.
Once you pass that threshold, a light clicks. Whoa. And you think about the previous cases similar to this, and you realize the type of heat that's going to come down. And I think it was a realization that, you know what, something needs to be done about this.
This gang...
but I don't think they intended to do this and fix the place up afterwards and paint it and have it all planned. No. Not at all.
I think each moment something kept turning.
It was spontaneous. He was probably angry at the fact that, well, this guy deceived us. I thought he was one of us, and the anger took over. A response.
There were people obviously who were in the room, and I guess according to law they would be complicit in the crime. Did they have a way to get? In other words, my mom always taught me, if you're there and something bad's going, get yourself out of there. Is that late. Possible in that situation?
It's too late.
It's too late. You're in there.
Just the fact that you're there.
All right.
You're a part. You're an accomplice.
It brings us to the nature of gangs, and so this gang, the Latin King Goonies, was what supposedly it was called, a takeoff of the Latin Kings, which has a whole other connotation in the borough of the Bronx. How easy is it to form a gang, and do you have any sense of what this particular group is all about?
Well, I'll tell you this much. Gangs evolve from a need. If there's one gang, that evolves a need for another gang to come up. As long as the presence of one,
group, it may be a
because as long as you have one group, there's someone that's being oppressed, there's someone that can be prey, and another group has to evolve in order to defend itself. So I honestly can't say that, that all gangs that go under that the Latin King Nation would agree with that, because there's leadership all over the place.
Do you think now there are other gangs, the Latin Kings, who are going to come out and say, you guys went too far, and then there's some...
Probably so.
There's probably
absolutely
something out there.
Because you have some leaders that may
used
not...
our name.
That absolutely, that might feel disappointed with that. That we're not about that.
Council member, I'm getting the sense, I get an education every day I open up the newspaper and read about these things, and my sense is it's all out there, and those of us who are adults at this point really don't know. Do you have a sense there's whole cultures out there that still need attention, and need support and need this kind of family structure that we haven't been able to give in traditional society?
Definitely, Gary. I think, again, we've seen speaking on what I see in my community in terms of, you go to Virginia Park on White Plains and Westchester Avenue, and you see certain groups congregating, and you'll see Dominicans on one side, you see African Americans on the other side, you see the Puerto Ricans on the other side. And, I have nieces and nephews who are teenagers who come off the bus, and they don't like walking through there because they're afraid that something might happen to them. And they speak about the different gangs and how they're being enticed to come and hang out with folks. You also have, now either a lot of single home, a lot of single parent homes, or you have both parents having to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. So the attention that, the family structure has been affected by that. And then, you throw on top of that some of the cuts that we make, in government to certain social service programs. And so you have kids running wild in the street and not being able to have a safe space at home to be at, so they're looking for some family structure outside of the home.
Providing the family structure, of course, is the bottom line for what Council for Unity does. A police officer or a squad car goes by a park in the situation that Council Member Palmer just talked about. Can they, and they know what's going on. I mean, we all know what's going on over there. Is there anything you can do, or if you do try to do something, you of course are now harassing, and then you've got a big problem. Is there anything the police can do?
Well, I think that the police presence is probably the key to that scenario. Based on what she says, what are they actually doing? They're congregating in groups. If they do see somebody being harassed, then of course they should do something.
Normal police presence, but of course, if you come upon a scene, then it's almost too late at that point. So you create a sense of security throughout the community, I guess.
Right.
Okay. We only have a couple of moments. I want to go around the room and give everybody a chance to just kind of sum up. So, Greg Lobo-Jost, as far as abandoned properties, what do we need to do?
Well, there's a big link between foreclosure and vacant properties and crime, and that's been documented in a lot of places across the country. And there's a hope that seeing these types of incidents, and also requiring the banks to kind of fork over the cash to maintain the properties would incentivize them to try to keep the homeowners in their homes in the first place. And that that's a whole nother issue. But if you can keep the homeowner in the home, and the banks might have to take a hit on some of the amount of money, then they're in the home, and you don't have that welcome mat open for anyone to come in. And
Professor Ort, for you, I guess there's the prosecution. There's many different aspects of the prosecution aspect, the notion of hate crimes. From the legal profession and the criminal justice side, how do you address this issue so it never happens again?
I think that, like I had mentioned before, it's important that the police and the community have a partnership, not just the police, but the whole criminal justice system, because it's a process, it's a system. So the community and the police have to work together. The community and the police and the prosecution have to work together for it to be successful at preventing things like this happening in the future.
Partnerships. I know for you, Mr. Johnson, and for Council for Unity, that's what you work on with the schools, with the communities. That's
Absolutely.
What you do.
It involves everybody. Everybody's a spoke on the wheel. You leave one out, there's going to be a problem.
And so for you folks, we're going to put up your contact information. For anybody, a parent or others who have questions or want to reach out, how do they get to you?
Well, they can call us at 212-701-9440. Our website is www.councilforunity.org.
Okay. Councilmember Palmer, after you hear all these myriad of issues, go
I'll
to work and get it solved tomorrow. What do you take away from this dialogue on what we need in the Bronx?
I think sitting here with this panel just demonstrate what true partnerships can build and how we can win back our communities. And I wanted to highlight, the community affairs part of the precinct is critical. It's important. It is where, the police officers making that contact with the community, especially with, gang members.
And we need to urge community members to reach out, whether it be your office, whether it be any of the people here in the industries they represent, but really not to sit back because there are many more good people than
I
not.
think you have many different campaigns. If you see something, you say something, it goes true for any crime.
And you can be protected by the system. Mr. McCall, we'll give you the final word. This was a terrible attack on your personal community. Frankly, I feel like on all of our communities. What do you want to ultimately say to the people of Bronx about what's going on?
Well, we ask everybody to join together with us with the community response. We are organizing community meetings. We have to reach out to straight allies. It can't just be a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender response. It needs to be everybody coming together saying, this is the Bronx. This is not acceptable in the Bronx. All of our elected officials have been standing with us. We're getting people who never have worked with the LGBT community before to come together, help us plan our town halls, help us plan our rally, help us go into the schools and teach tolerance.
And the number and contact information
it's
is
bronxpride.org.
They've got it on the screen.
Excellent. And if you look for us on Google Groups or Facebook, you can follow the response and be involved in the participation.
Sean Johnson, thank you so much. Dirk McCall, Annabelle Palma, Greg Lobo-Jost, Diane Ort. Thank you all for joining us in this very, very important program. Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk are available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar. Next week, we focus in on what Mr. Lobo-Jost knows all about. We talk housing and housing conditions in the Bronx. Bronx Talk, now in its 17th year, the longest-running weekly talk show in New York City, Monday nights at 9 on Cablevision Channel 67 and BronxNet on Verizon Fios 33 as well. Special thanks to producer Jane Folloro, director Michael Arias, and the cast of thousands up in the booth who set this whole thing up and made it work. And to you, good night.
I'm here to read you your rights.
My what?
We are all free and equal. Don't discriminate. You have the right to life.
You have the right to life and to live in freedom and safety.
You have a right to education. You have a right to your own things.
You have the right to social security. You have the right to play.
You have the right to democracy. You have the right to asylum.
You have the right to take responsibility.
And no one
and nobody can take these rights and freedoms away from you.
Why are you doing this?
You have a right to know.